Hi, I'm Dr. Bruce Hopler, the Executive Director of Church Strengthening for Converge. While this year 2020 has been undoubtedly challenging for everyone, it has been brutal for pastors. They've been having to lead their congregations through massive and sudden change without warning and without a roadmap. And while they make the best decisions they can count on the fact that whatever they decide, they're going to be assured that within their own leadership and congregation, they're guaranteed to have a large percentage to not agree with their decision, and sometimes even with a great deal of emotion and sometimes even anger. Pastors are weary. They have decision fatigue. They're emotionally exhausted, and some just have full-on burnout. That is why we started this series of videos this summer that are geared towards the emotional health of the pastor. Each week, I'm going to interview one pastor or leader to give us practical wisdom and guidance. This week, my very special guest is Dr. Michael Bischof. Michael was a founder and president of an organization called SOULeader, helping people in pastors and leaders and Christians in their spiritual, emotional, physical formation, and so much more. In fact, if you want to learn more about what they do, you can go to www.souleader.org. That is SOULeader with one L, www.souleader.org with one L. So, Dr. Bischof, thank you very much for joining us. You've been a special friend to Converge, and you've helped us in so many ways. I got to ask you up front, what are you seeing? Has this been some of the temperament of the pastors out there?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Good to be with you today again and to be able to talk about this subject that's so important. Yeah, I am seeing so much from the lives of pastors, the tension that churches are facing right now, daily, even several times a day, seeing such extreme things. So much so that I sat down with a pad of paper and I just thought, I got to write out what I'm seeing here, because I know there's a good handful of things. And I just kept writing and writing, and I ended up with over 24 things that I've been seeing. And I'm like, well, we can never talk about all those today, but let me see if I can pull out some of the main ones that seem like they're most important. And so I have a handful of those. Let me just run through this list, and then we can talk a little bit about them if that seems appropriate. But just the level of loss and sadness, and then the subsequent grief and mourning that's necessary to process that loss, I don't know if we've ever seen so much. I mean, ministry is a loss-prone endeavor, right? It's a loss-prone career. We are surrounded by suffering and death and struggle and pain. And that's one of the reasons many of us as pastors wanted to do this, because we love and care for people. Yet the amount of loss is so extreme and so pervasive and so global. We've never experienced that before. Then psychologists are even telling us there's some new phrases being used. One of those phrases I've taken note of is there's anticipatory grief for what might be coming, right? We know what grief is, but anticipatory grief is that kind of anxiety that comes when we know there's something bad that's still coming, or it could get worse, and our soul doesn't do well with that. I mean, that's one of the reasons we call this post-traumatic soul disorder, is because our soul doesn't know what to do with this reality at the time. Another phrase that psychologists are using is vicarious trauma for those that are suffering. Again, we know we all experience trauma in our churches and the people we care for, but vicarious trauma comes on us when we're around people that are going through a traumatic experience, and we bear one another's burdens, to use a scriptural phrase, right? And so you can only do that so many times before that load is so heavy that, like it says in scripture, we need to bear one another's load, bear one another's burdens, because you can't carry that load all by yourself. But that's another huge reality. Another one is just fear of the unknown or loss of control, which is just huge. And I think some of us feel guilty because we know that one of the biggest commandments in scripture is not to fear. And yet fear is a very human thing. It's a logical thing. There's so much unknown. And really, because we don't have control over something like a global pandemic,
Right.
that we don't know what to do with all those feelings and emotions. You mentioned a big one, decision fatigue. I've never heard that phrase used so much as in the last few weeks, that we're at a place as pastors who are leaders of organizations that we got to make decisions. And yet decisions are so hard when, like you said, you've got people on one side that want one thing and people on the other side that want another thing. And you just want to be a good pastor and be faithful to that. But yet I get so tired making decisions that I've never had to make before that might have consequences that are more severe than I've ever seen before, and that are going to like disunify people who are on the other side of this thing, whatever that thing is. And it's just exhausting. Those conflicting expectations within congregations or another. You could take the most unified church prior to COVID and put it in the midst of what we're experiencing right now, and it feels amazingly disunified in many places. And if that's not your case, then great for you. But I'm seeing churches that had 100% unity before feeling completely divided down the middle because of issues. That's exhausting. Even to the place of theological questioning, because some of the perspectives on things, especially as it related not just to COVID, but to all of the instances of George Floyd's death, murder, and all of the marches that took place around that, and those that would be on one side or another side, are bringing us to the place of saying, well, what does the Bible say about these things? And how theologically should I approach these? And that's giving us a new level of stress that we've never had before. There's loss of familiar structures. There's increased congregational polarization. There's the financial strain, both in our congregations, that so many, because of difficulty in giving or giving's down, or people that have lost their jobs. And then there's personal financial strain for many of you who maybe yourself or your spouse has lost their job. So financial strain is all over the place, or 401ks or our IRAs have tanked and the stock market's not doing well. So finances give us this whole extra set of pressures that we've never had to manage like this. Uncertainty about it, and the sense of transition coming up. We don't do well living with this level of uncertainty. What some would call discontinuous change. We're used to dealing with change that comes one after another, and it's more incremental or continuous. But others would say we're in such a place of discontinuous change that it's literally crazy making. Family pressures that get created out of this place. Health risks. I don't even need to mention that, as we know. And the fear around those health risks. And then ultimately, like the sense of vocational disruption. Can I keep doing this? Can I stay in ministry full time? Will my church even be able to pay me, or our staff, or whatever your situation is? So that's just a handful of these things that I've had firsthand experience with, all of them already. There are a whole bunch more, but hopefully you're sensing what I'm feeling, and we're in this together talking about these things.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge, and through our conversations about this is probably what inspired me to want to have you be one of the people we talk to. I was actually really excited about the title that you came up with this week, The New PTSD, Present Traumatic Soul Disorder. PTSD, Present Traumatic Soul Disorder. That's what's going on. So what are some of the realities that we're currently experiencing as pastors and leaders that are disordering our souls?
Yeah. It's a huge question. And, I don't mean any disrespect to anyone who has experienced severe PTSD in its normal sense, post-traumatic stress disorder, those in the military or those that have come from really abusive backgrounds that we know have PTSD. I just started realizing, and I heard a well-known psychologist say, this isn't just past. This is present. We're experiencing it in the present right now. It is traumatic, so we need to just realize the impact that has on us in the deepest places. It's impacting our soul in such a way that I don't know if we've ever experienced before. And it's a disorder, okay? Something's out of place. We're feeling something that we've never quite felt before. And that's normal. I was looking in Psalm 42 and 43, where 3 times the psalmist uses that phrase, like, why are you so downcast, my soul? It's like he's standing out here looking at his soul as his third person and being like, why are you feeling what you're feeling? I think we could really relate to that right now, right? There's something going on in our souls, whether we're pastors, leaders, or really just anybody, that we can't quite put our finger on it. We can't describe it. We can't explain it. We know we've never been here before. We just want it return to normal, but we have to realize normal's not going to come back like it was. There's going to be a new normal. There already is. And whatever that new normal looks like, we don't even know what that's going to look like now. But again, all of that puts a pressure on us. And I think it's important to understand this is something we see in these Psalms of Lament. In fact, that might be a good place to hang out a little bit. If that's not a place you normally spend time in Scripture, I encourage you to spend some time reading some of those Psalms of Lament to be able to realize that these are all feelings that are normal, are human, and God understands. And sometimes one of the best things we can do is cry out to God. But let me see if I can define a little bit to get to your question more specifically to what we're experiencing as pastors. Because out of that long list I read of our experiences, I think there's something going on in our outer world and there's something going on in our inner world. And what we've got is like a 1-2 punch, right? One famous book from the past was called Inner Journey, Outer Journey. We have this inner journey and an outer journey, and we're experiencing pressure in both. And I think if we understand that, it might be really helpful. So for example, our outer journey, all of those stresses and pressures going on in our churches, I think might best be described with one word. And you've probably heard this used a number of times. It's not an often used word, but I think it's helpful. And that's the word liminality. Liminality is this anthropological word that really from the Latin, it comes from the Latin word for threshold. And basically what it means is we're like in this in-between period between one reality and another reality. And we feel stuck and we don't know how to get out of it. And it's scary and it's fearful. And how many times I think that we've heard people say, you know, we're living in uncertain times, or we're living in precarious times, or we're living in so many adjectives are being used. But truly, maybe we need to understand that one of the reasons this is so hard, and one of the reasons we're experiencing what we are as leaders, is because we're living in liminal space right now. And we don't know what's around the next turn. And we don't do well with that. So that's our outer journey in the sense of what we're experiencing. Then in our inner journey, that list of things I shared, if I were to choose one word, it would be trauma. Trauma is a real thing, and we often minimize the level of trauma and the way our soul experiences that. So if you take liminality plus trauma, I really think that puts us in a place of what I'm calling fragmented languishing. Our lives feel fragmented, they're pulled apart, they're disjunct, they're disordered, and we're not doing well. We're languishing right now. We're struggling. And often as leaders, we don't want to share that with too many people because we feel like we're there to encourage them and help them and build them up. And yet inside our souls, there's a struggle going on that we've never really experienced before. And that's a tough, tough place to be. I think if we can turn that around a little bit though, and get some perspective, if I were to take that same little formula that I just talked about and say, if we could put some perspective onto our outer journey, combine that with some healing on our inner journey, we can move from that place of fragmented languishing to hopefully holistic flourishing. Okay. Now I know that's not easy to do. There are some steps we can take, but that's what I'd love to see us just be able to name it, to be able to talk about the difficulties like I'm talking about it right here. Just naming it takes some of the power out of it. Just naming it can even bring some healing to it, to find some safe people that you can just say, hey, here's the reality that we're experiencing. And that externalization process is one of the most helpful things we can do. You can even do that in a journal. If you don't have a person to be able to do that live with, take out a journal and start journaling some of those things.
So tremendous pressure on the outer journey, intersecting with the inner journey. What are some practical steps that we can take to deal with what our souls are experiencing?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. We all want to get to the practical, right? I know for me, I'm like the quick fix person. I want to give me the practical. I want to fix it now. And I just have to realize that this isn't going to be fixed quickly. But that doesn't mean there aren't some things that we can do. right? I really believe that we can do some things, and that's very empowering to think of what are some of the practical things that we really can do. I think one thing, let me give you a list of a few things here. One is just to practice listening discernment. I think one of the things for God's people to be able to do is to listen more deeply, observe more wisely to what's going on around us. Now, maybe you feel like you're doing that, but I think what that requires sometimes is taking a step back, slowing down, and to be able to pay attention to not trying to fix something quickly, but to listen to the hurts and the pains and the struggles and the frustrations of the people in a congregation, to observe what's actually going on, to try to see God's eyes on something. I think that's the definition of wisdom, seeing things from God's perspective. And so practice listening discernment, and realize that that's going to give you some wisdom as a leader, and it's going to equip you with some things to say to your congregation that you would not have if you didn't step back, take some time, create some space to practice that kind of listening. Okay. Second thing is to just weigh all your options. I know we feel tough right now, but so much pressure from that polarization within congregations. Should we open? Should we not open? If we open, what do we do? How do we social distance? What about that? How do we make a difference in a world for others? There are very much some biblical justice issues going on here behind the scenes. And how do we move into that? There's the tension of multiple things going on underneath the surface. And I think many of us are feeling like, if I speak out as a leader right now, as a pastor, I know I'm supposed to do that, but I'm going to tick a bunch of people off. They're going to get mad at me. And I think we just have to rest in the reality that, like it says in Luke 6:26, Jesus said, "Woe to you when everyone thinks well of you," because you're probably not telling the truth about something. And so Jesus wasn't one to mince words. He had amazing grace, but he also told the truth about things. So I think you need to weigh options, but I don't think you need to apologize for telling the truth about the way things are. I think it was Max Dupree that said that a leader's first responsibility is to define reality. So my encouragement to you as pastors would be, look for ways to help define reality. Don't feel bad to take a stand on something and be honest and tell the truth about something. Another one would be to identify new opportunities. I really believe the church is at a place where we've got great opportunities sitting right in our lap. The most obvious one to me, and I've been spending a lot of time talking to churches about, most of us have experienced the power of small group ministry, people meeting in homes, but we're in a place right now where everybody's at home for the most part. And many of us are not meeting yet, or we're going to be going back in incremental ways, or we're fearful to meet in large groups, or we shouldn't be doing that, or whatever the case. We have got an amazing opportunity to see God work in the neighborhoods of everyone who is part of our community, part of our church. So instead of church being the numbers of people that show up on Sunday, our ministry influence has to do with how many people are touching other people in their neighborhoods, on their street. It could be through family and friendship relationships, but to do it relationally, we're being encouraged to kind of move out of the building or one facility and to do kingdom ministry in the neighborhood, in the local place. And I think there's a whole theology of place that goes on underneath the surface there. And some of you might want to spend some time looking at that, studying that, and seeing how you might be able to be more effective, how your whole congregation is going to touch the lives of others. And I think that's a really practical thing to do. And I've heard some great stories from people about how children and teenagers are engaged in homes in a way that they weren't engaged when we had our typical structures and meeting. Many people want to see some of these things continue and change, even when we do go back to be meeting in public and such. So, of course, you got to evaluate potential obstacles. You need to be wise about these things. So I suggest brainstorming those. Don't worry about the potential negative things. Get together with yourself, your board, your team, talk about the things, the way they can go. Again, talking about these things will be really helpful and I think empower you. And then finally, take a next step, which is often called just take the next faithful step. When we don't know what to do and we feel overwhelmed, we do have the ability to take a faithful step at doing something. I jotted down a few things just before this time together, just trying to think, what are some of the things that I think might be most helpful in some of those next faithful steps. Maybe you just need to decide on some structure in your life, because our lives are so unstructured and feel out of control. Decide on some structure. Our soul likes structure. So maybe it's a daily plan. Maybe it's some rhythms you want to institute in your life. That's important for you, probably important for your staff, probably important for your church as well. Just lead without fear, as I mentioned, to know that God's going to be there with you. Some people might disagree, but it's good that you've been called to a place of leadership. And sometimes you need to just step into that and realize that's a next faithful step. One of the things I didn't mention from Psalm 42 and 43 is that when the psalmist says, why are you downcast, soul? That the phrase that comes after that is to put your hope in God. Other translations say trust. Put your hope. That we've got a sense of hope. And when all seems like it's falling apart, and interestingly, if you read Psalm 42 and 43, the context is worship. It's like when I can't go to worship and I can't be in the same sense of worshiping God and singing, and now we have requirements on our singing and such. What do? Well, psalmist says, put your hope in God. That's a next faithful step. Do something fun or do something that's life-giving as well. I know for me and my wife, we've got to have something on the calendar that we look forward to. That's hard right now because there's been more loss than there's been fun. But I still think you can plan maybe a short trip. Maybe it's even a short drive somewhere, a place that you like to drive where there's some scenery to get out in nature, do something fun like that. Or choose something life-giving for yourself. Something, it could be a new hobby. It could be something new recreational that you want to take up. Something that's good for you, good for your body, will also be good for your soul. And then one just final thought is get some coaching. If you need to talk to someone, one of the things I'm really enjoying is all the people that I coach right now, because we're having great conversations about what to do next and how to do it and how to engage your congregation. So those are real fun conversations to have. So if you've got a mentor in your life, a sage in your life, some wise person, be talking with them. If you don't, then find someone. If you're experiencing deep-rooted things, Bruce mentioned right at the top, going through burnout, if you're experiencing major depression, anxiety, you might want to find a therapist or a counselor. If you just want to talk through things of like, how do I adjust my ministry and even make some life changes, that's when it's a great thing to look for a coach, someone that you can talk through, once a month, once a week, somewhere in between that, whatever it would be. Once again, that process of externalization and talking to someone is so important and so empowering.
Michael, I'm sure that a lot of people got some very specific things. Like some people may take the whole batch and some people may just take one piece. For me, I think about the internal pressure that I had as a pastor that I was supposed to be right. So it almost became like a God complex, that I'm going to come up with the solution and I'm going to lead you fearlessly. And I come from the mountaintop and I've said, this is the right answer. And then lots of people start yelling, it's the wrong answer, and then all of a sudden you start getting these insecurities and all of that. This is a time above all to say, hey, I don't know either. I'm just going to listen. And we're going to journey, and we're going to be like the mad scientists. We're going to experiment with some different things, and some things will work and some things won't. And then again, kind of like what you were saying, pulling out some of the values that we've always said. The value of community, the value of small group, the value of soul care and taking care, putting some of those rhythms, into our life. There's probably not a pastor, a healthy one, anyone on the planet that doesn't say that we need to, that we don't need to have rhythms. They know that we need it, but are you doing it? Kind of building that in. And, and same thing, I've had to learn to see what was fun for me and just to kind of, to re-engage and get refreshment. I know this sounds like a cliche, and I probably say it a little too much, but this is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and just kind of figuring out what does it mean to grow. So, Michael, thank you. You have been a mentor for me since 2002 when I met you there in California, and I just appreciate the friendship, and I appreciate everything you had to share, and I appreciate what SOULeader is doing as a ministry. So thank you for joining us for this time.
You're welcome. It was great to be with you.